The wind howled across the frozen landscape, carrying with it a biting cold that could freeze the blood in your veins. The vast white wilderness stretched endlessly, with nothing but snow and ice as far as the eye could see. Above, the sky was a pale gray, a stark reminder of the ice planet's unforgiving nature. No human had ever set foot on this desolate world before, and the alien professor had made it clear they would be the first. ASA the humans gathered around the landing site, their breath visible in the cold air. They could only wonder what had brought them here. The professor, a tall, stern-looking alien with silver skin and glowing blue eyes, stood in front of them. Her sharp features remained emotionless, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "You may think you're here for a simple survival test," the professor's voice echoed, colder than the wind itself. "But you are wrong. Surviving this planet isn't just about staying warm. It's about learning the only way to survive, building igloos." The humans exchanged puzzled glances. They had expected to face some kind of wilderness challenge, but igloos? Why would the professor be so focused on something so simple? One of the survivors, a seasoned adventurer named Sarah, raised her hand. "Why igloos? What's so special about them?" she asked. The professor's eyes glinted with an unreadable emotion. "Trust me, you will understand soon enough. Igloos are not just shelters. They are the key to your survival on this frozen planet." With that, she turned and began walking towards a nearby snowbank. The humans followed reluctantly, their boots crunching in the deep snow. As they reached the edge of the snowbank, they saw a large, perfectly built igloo standing in the middle of the wasteland, untouched by the storms. "Here," the professor said, motioning toward the structure. "This is your first lesson. Start building." Confusion spread among the group. They had just arrived, and now they were expected to build something they had only heard of in stories. But the professor was insistent. "You have 3 hours, she announced, before turning to walk away. As the group hesitated, Sarah stepped forward. She had seen igloos before, but never in such conditions. She grabbed a shovel and started digging into the snow, trying to figure out the best way to begin. Slowly, others joined her. They worked together, the silence broken only by the sound of the snow shifting beneath their hands. Hours passed, and the igloo began to take shape. Despite their doubts, the humans were making progress. The structure grew more solid with each passing minute. But there was something off about the way the professor had instructed them. She hadn't explained why it was so important to build the igloos, and she hadn't shared any details about the planet's dangers. It was as if the test wasn't just about survival. It was about something more. As the igloo neared completion, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an eerie glow across the icy landscape. The wind picked up again, more violent than before. The humans hurried to finish their shelter, the snow swirling around them like a living thing. They were just finishing the final touches when Sarah noticed something strange. A shadow moved in the distance just beyond the edge of the igloo. It was too quick to be a person. "Did anyone see that?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible over the wind. The group turned, eyes scanning the snow-covered plains. Nothing. The shadow was gone. "I saw it too," Sarah whispered to herself. But what was it? The professor had vanished, just as quickly as the shadow. She had been watching them only moments before, but now there was no sign of her anywhere. The group exchanged uneasy glances. Had she left them alone on purpose? Or was this part of the test? As they huddled together inside the igloo, the temperature outside dropped rapidly. The wind outside howled louder, almost as if it was alive. Something wasn't right. The professor had said this was a test, but why? And what was so special about the igloos? A crackling noise from the far corner of the igloo interrupted their thoughts. One of the survivors, a young man named Ben, stepped forward and stared at the walls. The snow inside the igloo was shifting in a strange pattern, as if something was moving beneath the surface. "What's happening?" Ben asked, his voice trembling. Sarah quickly moved to his side, eyes wide in fear. "I don't know, but we need to get out of here." But before they could act, the igloo walls began to tremble, and a low rumbling sound filled the air. The ground beneath them shook, and the snow surrounding them seemed to shift as if it was alive. The igloo was no longer just a shelter, it had become a trap. "Get out!" Sarah shouted, but it was too late. The walls of the igloo cracked, and chunks of snow began to fall. The group scrambled to escape, but the snow was already closing in. The igloo wasn't just shelter, it was a warning. The professor's voice echoed through the storm, distant but clear. "You are not alone here. This planet hides more than just cold. And now, you have awakened it." The group froze in terror, realizing too late that the professor's test was not about building igloos, it was about surviving something far worse. The ice planet stretched out before them, endless and cold. A heavy fog of snow swirled across the barren landscape, the wind howling like an ancient beast. The team of humans had landed here only a few hours ago, following the orders of the alien professor who had brought them to this frozen world. She had told them that to survive, they would need to master one simple thing: building igloos. Standing before them, the alien professor watched with cold, emotionless eyes as they struggled to gather the tools needed to build their shelters. The humans were confused. Why igloos? They'd been expecting a typical survival test, not to be handed a lesson in igloo building. "You must build them properly," the professor said in her sharp voice. "Only then will you understand." But the humans had no choice but to obey. They had no idea what this strange planet held or why they were here. Only that survival was their top priority. They got to work, digging into the deep snow, shaping the ice bricks, and stacking them in a perfect circle. As the igloos slowly began to take shape, one of the survivors, Sarah, couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Why were they only allowed to build igloos? There had to be more to this test. She glanced around, her eyes catching sight of a strange symbol carved into the ice at the entrance of one igloo. It looked old, almost as if it had been there for centuries. "Hey, look at this," Sarah called to her team. The others gathered around, staring at the symbol. It was unlike anything they had seen before, a mix of jagged lines and curves, almost like an ancient language. But what was it doing here, on an ice planet so far from Earth? The professor had been watching them from a distance, her eyes never leaving the group. Sarah couldn't help but feel that the professor knew more than she was letting on. She had come here for a reason, and the humans were part of a much bigger picture. "Is it just me?" Ben asked, his voice low. "Or does this feel like we're meant to find something?" Sarah nodded, feeling the same unease. "Definitely. But what?" As they continued to build, the symbol remained etched in Sarah's mind. When the igloos were finished, the team gathered inside for warmth, trying to keep their spirits up. The professor had given them no further instructions, leaving them in silence, surrounded by nothing but the cold and the unrelenting snow. But Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the symbol. It was as if it held the key to the professor's true intentions. Late that night, as the rest of the team slept, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something important was hidden beneath the ice. She slipped out of her igloo quietly and made her way toward the strange symbol, determined to learn more. The wind howled louder, but Sarah didn't care. She was too focused on the mystery. When she reached the site, she knelt down and traced the symbol with her fingers. It felt smooth, almost as if the ice had been shaped by an intelligent hand. She didn't know what she was expecting, but something about the symbol felt alive. The more she touched it, the more the air around her seemed to change. It was as if the planet itself was reacting to her presence. Suddenly, she heard a low rumbling noise coming from beneath the snow. The ground trembled, and Sarah stumbled back in shock. The symbol on the ice began to glow, faintly at first, but then brighter, illuminating the entire area. It was as if it was calling to her. "Sarah!" Ben's voice echoed from the distance. He had woken up and noticed she was missing. Before Sarah could respond, the ground beneath her feet cracked open. She gasped, falling to her knees as the earth split. A hidden passageway, buried under centuries of ice, revealed itself in front of her. The symbol had unlocked it. The professor's voice suddenly filled the air, distant but clear. "So, you found it." Sarah turned to see the professor standing in the distance, her silhouette barely visible against the glowing light of the symbol. Her face was unreadable. "You weren't supposed to find that," the professor continued. The igloos. The symbols. They were never meant to be discovered by you. You've opened something you shouldn't have. What is this? Sarah demanded, heart racing. What is going on here? The professor's eyes seemed to glow in the darkness. This planet. It's not just a test. It's a prison. And you've unlocked its secrets. Now you must face the consequences. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. What had they just uncovered? And why had the professor brought them here in the first place? Was she a guide? Or had she led them straight into danger? The passageway beneath her feet began to rumble, and strange, echoing sounds filled the air. It was as if the planet was waking up. Something had been trapped here, frozen for centuries, and now that it was free, there would be no turning back. Go back to the igloos, the professor ordered, her voice cold and commanding. Stay inside. Do not follow this path. If you do, you'll be part of the awakening. And you will never escape. But Sarah didn't listen. She could feel the pull of the mystery, the desire to uncover the truth. I'm going down there, she said, her voice firm. Ben reached out to stop her, but it was too late. Sarah had already taken the first step into the dark, icy passage. She didn't know what she was about to face, but she knew she couldn't turn back now. As she ventured deeper into the passage, the walls began to glow with strange markings, matching the symbols she had seen earlier. It was like entering another world, a world buried beneath the ice for eons. The deeper she went, the more she realized. The igloos, the symbols, the professor, they were all part of a much larger puzzle. And now, she was the one who would have to solve it. The wind screamed through the icy landscape, relentless and biting. The humans, a small group of survivors from a failed expedition, huddled together on the barren ice planet. Their faces were pale from the cold, and their breaths formed visible clouds in the frigid air. Behind them stood a tall, imposing figure, the alien professor who had brought them here. The professor's voice cut through the howling wind. Survival is simple. Build your igloos, protect yourselves, and follow the rules. Fail, and you will not survive. The humans exchanged uneasy glances. They had been led to this frozen world with promises of survival training, but now it seemed that the professor had something else in mind. The ice planet had no known life, no food, and no shelter except for the igloos they were supposed to build. They were on their own, with only each other to rely on. But as they quickly learned, trust would be the hardest thing to find here. Start building, the professor ordered, pointing to the thick snow surrounding them. Time is running out. Reluctantly, the humans began to dig into the snow. They had never built igloos before, and the harsh conditions made it even harder. Their hands were numb from the cold, and their movements were slow and sluggish. But despite the challenges, they pressed on. The professor watched from a distance, her sharp eyes never leaving the group. As the hours passed, the team worked together to form the igloos, but tension was rising. Sarah, one of the survivors, kept glancing at the others, her instincts on high alert. Something wasn't right. It was the professor's silence that unnerved her the most. Why had they been brought here? And why was she so insistent on them building igloos? Sarah's thoughts were interrupted when Ben, another survivor, approached her. Do you think the professor is hiding something? He asked quietly. Sarah didn't answer at first, but after a moment, she nodded. I don't trust her. There's something off about all of this. She's pushing us to build these igloos, but why? She never tells us why we're really here. Ben glanced over his shoulder at the professor, who was still standing in the distance, watching them. What if she's testing us? To see if we can survive on our own? I don't think it's just a test, Sarah muttered. I think she wants something. And I don't know if we're part of the plan or the experiment. Suddenly, a loud scream echoed through the wind, freezing everyone in place. It came from one of the other survivors, Jack, who'd been working on an igloo at the far end of their small camp. The group ran toward the sound, hearts pounding in their chests. When they arrived, they found Jack lying in the snow, his eyes wide with fear. He was pointing at something just beyond the igloo. I saw it, Jack gasped. Someone's sabotaging us. I found footprints in the snow, not ours. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. The tracks were clearly human, but none of them had ventured far from the camp. It was impossible for anyone to have come this close without being seen. Who would do this? Ben asked, his voice trembling with fear. One of us, Sarah whispered. Her eyes darted around the group. Someone's trying to destroy us from the inside. The group fell into a tense silence, each person staring at the others, suspicion growing. Who could they trust? They had all been working together, but now everything felt different. No one knew who might be working against them. As the night fell, the cold seemed to grow sharper, more biting. The professor remained distant, her eyes cold and unreadable. The humans gathered inside their igloos for warmth, but the feeling of unease never left. Every time the wind howled outside, they wondered if the person responsible for the sabotage was one of them. No one dared to speak of it aloud. But the sabotage didn't stop. The following night, another igloo was damaged. The entrance was completely buried under snow, as if someone had intentionally blocked the way. They barely managed to dig it out before the cold claimed one of them. We need to find out who's doing this, Sarah said firmly, her voice tight with fear. We can't survive like this. Ben nodded, his face grim. But how do we know who to trust? We need to set a trap, Sarah suggested. We'll keep watch. If anyone tries to sabotage another igloo, we'll know who it is. The group reluctantly agreed. They took turns staying awake, watching the others from inside the safety of their igloos. The tension was unbearable, and every creak of snow or gust of wind made their hearts race. But nothing happened that night. The saboteur was smart, or perhaps just waiting for the right moment to strike. The next day, Sarah decided to confront the professor. She was done waiting. Why are we really here? Sarah demanded, her voice harsh. This isn't about survival, is it? There's something more going on. The professor's eyes flickered with something. Was it amusement? You're smart, Sarah. But not smart enough, she said, her voice cold as the planet itself. This is a test, yes. But it's more than that. It's a game. Survival is only part of it. Betrayal is the key. The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Betrayal? The professor had been testing them all along, but the real challenge wasn't survival. It was who would turn on the others first. Who would betray the group for a chance to escape this frozen hell? Just then, a loud crash interrupted their conversation. The snow was shifting again. Something was moving under the surface. The ground cracked open, and from the darkness beneath, something began to rise. It wasn't a creature. It was a ship, an alien ship buried under the ice for centuries. You've awoken it, the professor said, her voice laced with a strange satisfaction. And now the game truly begins. Sarah looked around at the group, fear and betrayal twisting in her chest. The game wasn't just about surviving the ice. It was about who would betray the others for the ultimate prize, escape. And the professor? She wasn't a guide. She was the game master. The stakes were higher than they had ever imagined. And now, in the shadow of the ancient ship, the real fight for survival was about to begin. The wind howled through the frozen wilderness, a constant reminder of the merciless landscape they had landed in. Snow whipped in every direction, the world beyond their small camp lost in a blizzard of white. The humans had arrived on this ice planet with high hopes of surviving the harsh conditions. What they hadn't expected, however, was the overwhelming silence that seemed to swallow everything around them. Their mission was simple: survive. But it was becoming clear that survival here was going to be far more difficult than they could have imagined. Sarah, the team's leader, looked over the makeshift igloos they had built, each one a fragile shelter against the unforgiving cold. The professor, an alien with eyes as cold as the ice beneath them, had told them only one thing: build your shelters and stay inside. The planet will decide if you live or die. No further explanation had been given. No warnings. No clues about what else lay hidden in the ice. Why are we really here? Sarah muttered under her breath as she stared out across the frozen expanse. The cold made her feel numb, both physically and mentally. It wasn't just the temperature that sent a chill down her spine, it was the uncertainty. Something was off. She could feel it. Beside her, Ben, one of the younger members of the group, squinted into the distance. I don't like the way the professor keeps watching us. It's like she's waiting for something to happen. Sarah nodded. I agree. It's like we're part of some experiment. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of a distant rumble, a noise that seemed to come from deep within the ice itself. For a moment, no one moved. It was as if the whole world had gone still. Then, the ground trembled beneath their feet. Ben whispered, eyes wide with fear. No, Sarah said, her voice trembling. That's not an earthquake. The ice beneath them groaned, and without warning, a massive fissure split open in the ground. The crack ran across the snowy plains, deep and wide, as if something enormous was stirring beneath. A dark shadow seemed to rise from the crack, moving with unnatural speed. Get to the igloos, Sarah shouted, panic rising in her chest. Move! The group scattered, rushing toward the relative safety of their shelters. But the ground continued to shake, and the temperatures seemed to drop even further. Sarah barely made it inside her igloo when she heard the first explosion. The force of it shook the structure, and snow began to pour inside. What the hell is happening? Jack yelled from the next igloo. What's going on outside? Sarah didn't have an answer. She could only stare at the ice walls, praying the igloo would hold. But she knew something was hunting them. And it wasn't the ice or the cold, it was something far more dangerous, something alive. Another blast shook the ground, and this time, the ice beneath them cracked violently. A hole opened up just outside Sarah's igloo, and she could see movement, something large and dark emerging from the depths of the planet. The figure was monstrous, its shape shifting as it crawled up from the fissure. Everybody, inside now! Sarah screamed, but it was too late. The creature broke through the surface with terrifying speed. It was massive, its skin glistening like the ice itself, with sharp, jagged spines running down its back. Its eyes glowed with an eerie light, and its growls filled the air, shaking the very ground. The team inside the igloos scrambled for their weapons, but it was clear they were ill-prepared for something like this. The creature let out another roar, shaking the ground beneath them. It wasn't just an attack, it was a warning. Why would the professor bring us here? Ben gasped, his voice trembling with fear. This isn't just about survival. She knew this was coming. Sarah turned toward the others, her mind racing. We need to fight back. We need to hold the line until we can figure out what's going on. The professor had known about the creature. She had known that it would come for them. But why hadn't she warned them? Had she brought them here to die? Get to the main igloo, Sarah ordered. We need to regroup and plan. We're not making it out of this if we don't stick together. As the group gathered inside the largest igloo, the sounds of the creature's growls and the rumbling of the planet grew louder. The ice beneath them continued to crack, sending tremors through their shelters. This isn't just about survival anymore, Sarah said, her voice low but determined. We're being tested. The professor wanted to see if we could survive, but this creature, it's a test, too. The ice, the creature, it's all part of it. Ben's eyes widened. A test? You think it's all staged? I don't know, Sarah replied, her mind spinning. But I don't think this planet is just random. I think it's been waiting for us. It has a purpose. And the professor, she's the one who brought us here for a reason. Suddenly, the professor's voice echoed from outside. You can't hide. It's too late. You've awakened it. Sarah's blood ran cold. What does that mean? The professor stepped into the entrance of the igloo, her face hidden behind a mask of shadows. Her eyes glowed faintly, almost as if she had been waiting for this moment. You've come to this planet, not just to survive, but to awaken the ancient creatures beneath the ice. And now that you have, there is no going back. A wave of dread washed over Sarah. The professor wasn't here to help them. She was here to ensure that they became part of the planet's twisted ecosystem. We need to escape, Sarah said urgently. Now. Before it's too late. But the professor's cold smile never faltered. Escape? You've already played your part. There's no escape from the ice. The planet will decide your fate. Outside, The creature's growls grew louder, and the ground shook once more. The igloos were under fire from both the planet and the unknown forces within it. The ice planet had always been a deadly game, but now it seemed to be turning into something far more sinister. And for Sarah and her team, survival was no longer the only goal. The only question that remained was, could they make it out alive, or would they become another part of the ice planet's dark legacy? The icy wind howled across the desolate landscape, carrying with it a biting cold that seemed to freeze everything in its path. The vast expanse of snow stretched endlessly, giving no hint of shelter or warmth. The group of humans stood at the edge of this frozen wasteland, each of them wrapped in layers of clothing, their breath visible in the frigid air. "Build your shelters," the alien professor's voice echoed, her tone cold and impassive. "And survive. Only then will you pass the test." Her words hung in the air like an ominous warning. The humans, still unsure of their purpose on this ice planet, glanced at each other in confusion. There were no clear instructions, no explanations. Just the cold, the endless snow, and the professor's cryptic orders. Sarah, the leader of the group, turned to face the others. "All right, we don't have much choice. We need to build these igloos fast. If we don't have shelter, we won't survive the night." The team immediately set to work, carving out blocks of snow and stacking them to form the walls of their igloos. The work was grueling, and the cold made their fingers stiff and slow. But despite the hardships, they pressed on, driven by the need for warmth and protection. As the first igloos took shape, the group's unease only grew. What was this test? What were they really being asked to prove? The professor had given them no answers, only the cold, endless snow, and the looming threat of something far more dangerous than the planet's icy grip. After hours of work, the team had finally managed to construct enough igloos for everyone to take shelter. They huddled inside, grateful for the protection from the bitter wind. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The professor had disappeared, leaving them alone in the frozen wilderness. "Do you think she's really gone?" Ben asked, his voice quiet, as if he too sensed something was wrong. "I don't know," Sarah replied, her voice tinged with doubt. "But something doesn't feel right. It's too easy." The hours passed and the night fell colder than ever. The temperature plummeted even further, and the wind began to pick up once more. The group tried to sleep, but rest was impossible. Every creak of the igloo, every gust of wind outside made them jump. Something was out there, watching. Suddenly, a loud noise broke the silence. It sounded like someone was moving outside. Sarah's heart raced as she stood up, her breath coming out in heavy clouds. What was that? The others held their breath, straining to hear. Another noise, closer this time. Then, the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching in the snow. "Someone's out there," Jack whispered, his voice barely audible. Sarah's mind raced. The professor couldn't have left them alone. Could she? Or was this part of the test? Before anyone could respond, the ground beneath them trembled, a low rumble that sent a chill down their spines. A massive explosion shook the snow, and the igloo shuddered violently. Sarah fell to her knees, clutching the walls for support. "What the hell was that?" Ben shouted, panic rising in his voice. Another blast, followed by a strange, guttural growl that echoed through the snow. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything they had heard before. Something was hunting them. Sarah stood up, her mind racing. "We need to get out of here. Now." They barely had time to react before the snow poured in, filling the entrance and trapping them inside. "We're trapped," Jack yelled, his voice filled with fear. Sarah's heart pounded. She struggled against the snow, her hands trembling as she tried to dig her way out. But it was no use. The snow was too thick, and the ice was too strong. Then, through the blizzard, they heard it again, the growl. Closer this time. "We can't stay here," Sarah said urgently. "We need to find a way out, and fast." But as she turned to face the others, something strange caught her eye. The professor's figure, standing just outside the igloo, watching them. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dark, and her face was unreadable. "Professor," Sarah shouted. "What's going on? Why are we being attacked?" The professor didn't respond, her expression cold and distant. Instead, she took a step back, disappearing into the blizzard. "She's not helping us," Ben said, his voice shaking with disbelief. "She's watching us suffer." Sarah's heart sank. This wasn't a test of survival. This was a game, a cruel, dangerous game, and they were the players. Suddenly, the ground shook again. This time, the noise wasn't from the outside. It was coming from within the igloo. The walls began to crack, and the temperature inside plummeted as the snow poured in from every side. "We're gonna die here," Jack muttered, his voice broken. "No," Sarah said, her voice filled with determination. "We're getting out of here. Together." Sarah's heart raced as she realized that the situation was far worse than she had imagined. The igloos weren't just shelters, they were traps. Traps designed to keep them inside, to break them down mentally and physically. She turned to the others. "There's a way out. We just have to make it through the storm." As they fought to escape, they realized the true nature of their predicament. The professor had brought them here to test them, but it wasn't about building igloos or surviving the cold. It was about breaking their spirits, pushing them to their limits and beyond. But Sarah refused to give up. She had to fight for her team, for their survival. Through the freezing wind and the suffocating snow, they pushed forward, inching closer to the edge of the trap. But every step they took, it felt like the ice planet was trying to pull them back. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the edge of the blizzard. Sarah took one last look at the igloos at the trap they had barely escaped, and then, with a deep breath, they stepped out into the unknown. But even as they walked away, the sense of dread never left. The ice planet had no mercy. And the professor? She had only just begun to reveal the true nature of the test. There would be more. The frozen trap was just the beginning. Would they survive the next challenge? Only time would tell.